In this presentation, we will continue looking at the forms within the vendor section, this time concentrating on the form of the pay bill forms within QuickBooks Online. Here we are in the free file of Craig's Design and Landscaping, which you could find by searching in your browser QuickBooks Online Test Drive. We're now going to go over to the desktop version so that we can take a look at the flow chart. Last time we had the enter bills. We entered the bills in the prior presentation. We entered a couple bills, and the bills typically will be increasing the expense and increasing the liability of accounts payable. The liability represents us owing people money, the vendors, the people we owe, and now we're going to be paying them with the pay bills. Now remember that the pay bills basically is writing a check. All we're doing is basically writing a check. However, we want to see this form as the pay bills type form because it'll actually indicate the pay bills type form in the reports, and that helps us to tie out and see that check that we wrote ties out to the enter bills, and therefore it's going to be linked to accounts payable. And if we want to see the actual expense account related to it, then we're going to have to go to the actual bill rather than the check. Now the journal entry related to paying the bill will look something like this. When we pay the bill, then we've got the checking account will be decreasing because we're actually basically writing a check here, and then we are writing a check. And then the other side is going to be the accounts payable. So the accounts payable is a liability account representing us owing someone. It's kind of a bad account. We don't like it. And it's going down, right? Because we owed someone money, now we paid them, therefore the account representing us owing them money is now decreasing. So that's going to be the journal entry that will typically be there with regards to the pay bill form. Let's see if we can find a pay bill form within QuickBooks Online. But before we do that, let's open up our trusty reports one more time. We're going to get a lot of practice opening up our reports here. We're going to go to the reports down below. We're going to open up that profit and loss report. We're going to scroll back up top in the profit and loss report. We're going to change the dates up top from 01/01/20 to 12/31/20. We're going to run that report. Then I'm going to copy that report, making a duplicate of it. I'm up on the tab up top. I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to duplicate that report. Next, we'll do the same thing for the balance sheet. I'm going to go back to the first tab. We're going to go down to the reports down on the left. We're going to be selecting the balance sheet report this time. We're going to scroll back up top and change the dates for that balance sheet report to 01/01/20 to 12/31/20. Change or run that report once again. So January through December 2020, running that report. Now we're going to duplicate the tab. Going back up top, right clicking on that tab, duplicate that tab. There we have our trusty balance sheet. Now, last time we entered the actual bill, if we scroll down, what we're concerned with, and I'm gonna minimize the whole assets section by checking off this little triangle. And there we go. And now we got the liabilities. We put it into the accounts payable. That's the main factor that we have here. So we go into accounts payable. We have these two bills related to the phone bill and Bob's Burger. And so there we have it, the 67, the 150. If we scroll back up top, then back to our summary. That's what's in the accounts payable. Now, the other side went to the expense accounts right now, but what we're concerned with is what's in the payable. Now we're going to say, hey, we got to pay those people. So we're going to go then to, I'm going to go to the first tab to do this. I'm going to go back to the first tab so I don't mess up our reports. And so I'll go to the first tab. This is where I do stuff on the first tab, and the other tabs are where we go to see what stuff was done or what the stuff we did to the financials. So, okay, so now we're in the vendor section. We're going to scroll down and we're going to go to the pay bills. So pay bills. This is an actual form. When you think about this, you are actually paying the bills. But for QuickBooks, you want to think of it as the form, the data input form that will then be driving the journal entry that will then affect at least two accounts on the financial statements, the balance sheet, the profit and loss report. So we're going to go then into that pay bills, and you'll note that this will basically link then to all the data input that we have had in place. So then if I was to select the payment method, I'm going to actually say that we want to go to the checking. So the checking account, and we'll make the payment on 01, let's say 21/20. And so there we have that. Now, these are actually going to be checks that we wrote. So when we go in here, we don't see actual checks. I don't see an input for a check screen, like I'm going to pay this vendor and so on and so forth. But I already have that information. All I need is the name of the information and the check information. What we do have is the vendors that we have entered the bills for. So if we scroll through these vendors at the bottom, we see our two vendors that we had entered for the Cal Telephone and the Bob's Burger down here. So what we could do then is, what this is nice for is it allows us to sort this information. We can enter the bill up front, enter the bill when we get the bill, enter the bill into the system so it actually affects our financial statements as we get the bill, as opposed to waiting for the piece of paper on our desk until we want to pay it at the end of the month, possibly. We can get it in there, and then we can sort our bills and actually remind ourselves as to which bills are due, when they are due, which ones we want to pay. So now that they're in the system, I can go through here and say, who do I want to pay? And I could say, well, I have these three, Norton and these people, but those are not important people. The important people is Bob's Burger. I like them over there. I'm going to pay them. We're going to pay Bob's Burger. So we want to keep them happy. So we're going to pay that one, and then we'll pay this one. We can choose which ones to pay. Now, when we then pay them, it'll basically just generate a check. So the actual form will be a check, but the check will indicate that it's a bill pay check when we go to the data reports. And that'll indicate that it's going to be decreasing the accounts payable, not going to the expense account as we write the check. Now, it's important to note that there's a couple ways you can do the checks. If you're writing checks, you might actually, if you have a small company and you're not writing checks out of QuickBooks, you could still use this feature, and then you'd have your separate checkbook that you'd have, and you'd actually be writing the check in your checkbook, and you could still enter this into the system in the same way, and the system will then generate a check in the same way, and the check will be the form that will drive the journal entry that you want to enter the system. So you could do it even if you're not using checks within QuickBooks. If you are using checks within QuickBooks, then you can actually have QuickBooks print the checks for you. To do that, you would need the pre-printed checks that you would then put into the printer, and QuickBooks would then print the amounts on the pre-printed checks if you're using pre-printed checks. So I'm not going to print these. What I'm going to do is just say save and close. So I'm going to go ahead and say save and close. But before I do that, let's check one more other thing. What's going to be the journal entry for this item? If you see a pay bills form, a pay bills check, you know that it is basically a check. The checking account would then be going down just like any other check. The other side then, even though we're paying, for example, the phone company and Bob's Burger, would not be going to the expense account, but decreasing the liability account of accounts payable. So that's going to be the difference. Let's check that out. We're going to say save and close and see if that is indeed the case, or if I'm lying to you. I'm not lying. That's what's going to happen. And then we're going to go up to our balance sheet. Let's check out our balance sheet. So we're going to go into the checking account up top. Let's see what happens within the checking account. We should see a check that was written in this pay bill function. If I scroll back down, there it is. Notice the transaction type. It says it's a check. It is a check, but it's a pay bills check. So that's important to note. That's kind of a distinct form within QuickBooks, which is telling you something different, which is that this check is going to accounts payable. The other side is going to accounts payable, not an expense account. And then if we go to the right, then of course we have our amounts. The other side, you can see in the split account going to accounts payable. If I was to select that check, the 150 in this case, let's see what it looks like. And there it is with our pay bill screen. If we scroll down, we have our bill that it's connecting to. And that's a nice feature because notice you can't really see the expense account here. So it's actually connecting, still showing you the bill. And if I want to say, okay, I know I paid it and I paid down the payable, but I'd like to see the expense account that was hit. Well, then you'd have to go to the original bill, which you can go to here and then take a look at the transaction that was on the actual bill. If I was to select the bill. So this is the original bill. You can see now it's been paid over here. And then if you scroll down, you can say, oh yeah, it went to meals and entertainment. That's the expense account that it originally went to. And then I'm going to close this back out. And then I'm going to go to the left. I'm going to scroll back up. We're going to go back to our reports. Now the other side is going to be in accounts payable. It's going to be decreasing the accounts payable. So if I go down to our liabilities, there's our payable. And I'm going to go into the payable. And we should see our trusty check down there. There's our two checks that we wrote. Once again, they're special checks. They're checks that don't just say check, they say bill pay check. And if I scroll to the right, this time looking at the $67 that was paid for the phone company, we go back to our pay bill. And again, if I want to know more detail about the expense account, I'd have to link to the actual bill because that's where we've recorded the expense account. If I close this back out and I scroll back up top, and go back to our report information. Note that if you look at the profit and loss report, if I go to the profit and loss report, nothing happened over here because even though we paid the phone company and we paid for the burger place, which were expense accounts, these meals and entertainment account and the utilities account, the phone company, the telephone, had been recorded prior to this when we entered the bill, because that's probably closer to the point in time that we actually consumed the food in this case and the service of the telephone company, as opposed to when we paid it, which is a later point in time. So that's when the expense would be recorded. At this point, when we said pay the bill, that's not when we recorded these two transactions. So if I go into here, for example, the meals is being driven by the bill, not the check that we wrote. So it's on an accrual basis. So then if I go back, that's going to be our information for those two. Now there's a couple other things in the vendor section that we might want to consider, such as the purchase of inventory, such as something like a purchase order, where we will be considering that in our example problem. So we'll take a look at the purchase order next time.